evening. Wanted to say a couple words before I introduce our guest for the evening. First of all, I wanted to mention the film series that this screening is a part of. We're doing a program called Science on Screen, which is an initiative supported by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation and our friends the Coolidge Corner Theater. The idea behind this series is to pair films about the natural and social sciences and technology with speakers from the field, and we have a good one tonight. So, before we get into it, just wanted to mention a couple things about this film as well. This is a weird little film, but I think it's kind of a special one. You guys are in for a treat. The first thing that you're going to notice is that it has kind of a different look than you usually see in films, and you might think to yourself, like, was this shot on like a 1980s VHS tube camera or what? And the answer is yes. It was. But it's kind of cool, and it gives the film a kind of cool vibe that I think starts to link up with some of the themes later in the film. And, and so I just hope you'll enjoy this odd little puzzle of a film. If you don't have a go-to favorite philosophical sci-fi mockumentary, well, maybe you will after tonight. So in a moment, we're going to bring up Dr. Frank Lee of Drexel's Entrepreneurial Game Studio. And he's going to give an introduction about the history of artificial intelligence. And he's also going to stick around after the screening to do a little Q&A. So I hope you guys will stay around and join us and join in the conversation. So please give a round of applause to Frank Lee.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me as well. So it's a pleasure to talk to you. It feels like a very small dinner table. So I actually like the intimate aspect of the meeting here. Initially I thought I would be like a weird, like a odd person to talk before this film. This film is about computer chess, AI, if you're sort of familiar with that phrase. But as more I thought about it, because I'm the professor of game design, so I do gaming at Drexel, and essentially I'm most known for putting Tetris on the Sears Center, which is the skyscraper right next to the Amtrak station, the 30th station. So why would a game professor talk about computer chess and AI and so on? But in my other life, my actual training, my Ph.D. is in psychology, cognitive psychology, which is essentially looks at trying to simulate human cognition in computers through computer programming and so on. Doing cognitive architectures, computer modeling of human cognition is what I was trained to do. But what I do now, it has nothing to do with that. So this movie allowed me to actually go back in time to what I was trained to do, as well as how many people here are 50 years or older? So I just turned 50 this year. This movie was very nostalgic for me because it touched upon the computing age of late 70s, early 80s, and so on. So I think with that in mind, I wanted to talk about history of AI, which is the history of cognitive science, and so on. So 10 to the 9, 1 billion, or essentially 1 followed by 9 zeros. It's a huge number. 10 to the 12, 1 trillion, 1 followed by 12 zeros, and so on. So let me throw out a number for you, 10 to the 78, right? 1 followed by 78 zeros. That number represents our best estimate of the number of atoms in the universe, of the known universe. Now, what I'll talk about is state space. So imagine a chessboard. You make one movement. All the possible first move that you can make, that's each one of those is a state. From that point on, all the possible moves that you can make from that first move are states. All the possible states that a chessboard could be in is the complete total space, state space of chess. It's been estimated that the total number of states that chess could be in is 10 to 120. So in essence, AI from the birth is about taking this large space and searching for a solution, essentially a path to winning. Right? Given that, and given what we know at the time, smart people play chess. So in order to create smart AI, we need to look at chess, is another way to sort of look at it. So it has been assumed, it was for a long time, that chess was going to be hard. And it was hard. There was no chess program that matched the level of a grandmaster until fairly recently. But let's go back to the beginning. So in 1936, Alan Turing, who is seminal in computer science and mathematics, wrote a paper called On Computable Numbers with an Application to Einstein Problem. Essentially, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. But that paper describes what computer science refers to as the Turing machine. It's basically a mathematical model of what a computer is, what a computation is. And that led to the actual digital computers that were created based on that mathematical model. And that was in 1936. In 1950, same Alan Turing wrote the most famous paper probably in cognitive science and AI. It's called Computing Machinery and Intelligence. From it, he described a game called the Imitation Game. Are people familiar with the movie Imitation Game? It was recently with, what's his name? Benedict Cumberbatch, playing Alan Turing. So what the Imitation Game describes, and he starts that paper with the phrase, "Can machines think?" ? In it, he describes a game, a simple game, where in two rooms that are closed off, there is a person and a computer. You are in the third room communicating by teletype, the technology at that time, but imagine a computer, right? No voice, nothing, just through text back and forth with the person and a computer. His argument with the Imitation Game is that if you cannot tell the difference between a person and a computer, your job is to try to figure out which one's the computer and which one's the person. If you cannot tell the difference, then by definition, that computer is intelligent. Does that make sense? So that's the Imitation Game in essence, and that's what's referred to as the Turing test. And that has been, it's basically, try to imagine how are we going to define intelligent, right? I could look at you, and you could be a robot, a machine. I mean, I couldn't tell. If you're giving me intelligent responses, I'm assuming you're human. So the argument goes, this is an operational definition of what intelligence is, as opposed to thinking about souls, about consciousness. This operationalizes, quantifies what a definition of what intelligence is. So that was in 1950. In 1956, there was a conference at Dartmouth University which gathered together the researchers, the leading researchers at the time, studying intelligence, computational intelligence. And that conference was the first place where artificial intelligence was first referred to and was coined. And within it were people like Herb Simon and Alan Newell, who were psychologists studying computation. Marvin Minsky, one of the founders of AI from the computer science perspective, as well as John McCarthy. And in that, it was a summer conference. They were there for all summer. At the end of the summer, Alan Newell and Herb Simon showcased an actual AI called Logic Theorist. This program was the first one to exhibit intelligence, meaning what the program did was it solved a mathematical theorem from Principia Mathematica from Whitehead and Russell. So it basically showed that this program can solve what we think as higher intelligence, which is solving theorems, right? That's what mathematicians do. So that was in 1956. In 1958, Rosenblatt published a paper called The Perceptron, a probabilistic model for information storage and organization in the brain. Before that, we're thinking about sort of computers and computation, but this was the first paper where they described computation being influenced by the organization of the brain. So this is where, if you're familiar with the term parallel networks or neural networks, was first introduced. So that was in 1958. In 1965 through late mid-70s, within cognitive science and especially cognitive psychology, and all the researchers doing AI, they were studying AI to study human cognition, how people think. They were interested in how people thought, and by trying to replicate that in a computer, you have a better understanding about human cognition. So cognitive psychology and AI were one and the same during that time. So a lot of the work in cognitive psychology, especially studying how people solve problems, were used as heuristics in computer chess programs. A lot of the search algorithms that computer chess programs used at that time came from the study of how human experts, human chess players, essentially solved play chess and so on. One really neat example was a study done in 1965 by de Groot, where he was interested in what makes an expert chess player and a novice chess player different. In particular, what he did was he created essentially randomly generated a middle play chessboard. So imagine all the pieces in the chessboard during about maybe 5 or 6 plays in. Showed it to an expert chess player and a novice chess player for 5 seconds, took it away, and asked them to recreate the board from 5-second viewing. The expert chess players were able to remember up to about 20 pieces, locations. The novice players were only able to remember about 4 or 5. Right? So in essence, the expert chess players remember far more about the chessboard than the novice chess players. But what's interesting is those board positions were legal positions. This is something that you could have gotten into through legal play. What they did as a second experiment was perfectly randomize the pieces everywhere, and then showed it to the expert chess player and novice chess player. With that, with the same method of 5 seconds, there was no difference between expert chess players and novice chess players. They recreated about 4 or 5 things. And they actually the expert chess players report being very disturbed and uncomfortable with the chaotic nature of that board, right? So a lot of the early work in human problem solving, how experts do it, how novices do it, really fed into how AI was approached. And that sort of accumulated in a really famous book within cognitive science called Human Problem Solving by Alan Noah and Herb Simon. Alan Noah was a student of Herb Simon. Herb Simon is famous for having the Nobel Prize in economics in 1940 or so. And the other thing was he was a professor at Carnegie Mellon, and I was actually a student and TA of Herb Simon at Carnegie Mellon. In 1980, John Searle, a philosopher, came up with an argument that no matter, it was an argument directly against the Turing test. Even if you could create a computer that you couldn't tell apart, intellectually, from a person, it still is not intelligent. He made that argument. And he made that argument through essentially a thought experiment. So imagine yourself locked in in a room. In front of you is instructions written in your language, in English. But there are all these symbols, and it tells you if you get this symbol, output this symbol. You have an inbox, you have an outbox. If you have this symbol, look up at the table, find this other symbol, and output that symbol. The argument is from the outside, this is essentially a Chinese language machine, right? I'm, as a Chinese person, is inputting questions through these slips. Inside you, just looking up the symbol and outputting the correct symbol. From outside, I'm having an intelligent conversation. But from inside, you have no idea. You don't know Chinese. You're just following the instructions that's on the computer. So the argument goes, a computer is simply a symbol manipulator. It manipulates symbols. Another way to put that is, when we talk about a chair or a movie, we know what that is. When computers talk about a chair and a movie, it's just bits to them. It has no context or sense of what that is. And what Searle calls intentionality. So he made that argument that created a huge ruckus within AI. Back and forth arguments among artificial intelligence, you're wrong, you know nothing, and from philosophers, arguing back and forth and so on. The other interesting thing is John Searle is a professor that I had when I was a student at Berkeley as well. So I actually got that argument from him directly. In 1985, there's essentially a schism between cognitive science, people who study intelligence, AI, because they want to study human intelligence, versus machine learning. They just wanted it to do intelligent stuff. It doesn't matter whether it behaves like human beings and so on. So that accumulated in 1985 with a program called Chip Test. This was a hardware designed specifically to play chess, to do search, to do massive amount of search. Before then, all the search was done in software, using regular computers available at the time. With this, Chip Test led to Deep Thought, which led to Deep Blue, which became the computer that beat the human grandmaster, Garry Kasparov, in 1997, I believe. But before then, so that was in 1985. 1986, neural networks made a comeback through essentially two books called Parallel Distributed Processing, because from 1958 to now, to 1986, neural networks more or less died because there was a huge argument against it, saying that it couldn't even solve simple problems. That problem was addressed in PDP, in Parallel Distributed Processing, in 1986, and that led to what we know, and I guess what's the really hot thing in AI called deep learning. People heard of that phrase as well? Much of AI you see now is basically neural nets, multi-layer neural nets. In 1991, so in one side you have this perfect hardware design, specific, it does nothing but chess. And from the cognitive science side, that hardware looks nothing like the brain, right? Because I'm interested in studying how humans play chess, and by doing AI to get a better understanding of how humans play chess, but their hardware is basically an engineered solution to play chess, not a hardware designed to mimic how humans play chess. Does that sort of make a difference? So that schism between essentially machine learning, where I don't care how people do it, I just want the problem to be solved, is the approach, versus cognitive science, where I still care about how humans solve problems. One example of it is at the chip level, that Chip Test is able to search somewhere between 100 to 200 plies or layers deep. So imagine in chess, I make a move, you make a move, I make a move. Each of those is called a ply, a level. Typical human, even grandmasters, look about 5 moves ahead. At most, they might look at 10 in a very narrow sense. But these hardware chips were doing 120 moves ahead. That tells me nothing about how human grandmasters are able to play chess, right? That's that schism that happened. A further schism happened in 1991. There's a famous paper by Rod Brooks, a roboticist at MIT, and it was titled Intelligence Without Representation. His argument was that we were studying AI all wrong, because people were trying to look at higher level, human level intelligence and trying to recreate that, whether it's through hardware, through chess hardware, or through programs. His point was that we need to go to the very basic, almost at the insect level, look at how those behaviors create intelligent behavior. So he was famous for creating sort of these simple robots that would go and find cans at MIT campus and bring it back to the recycling essentially site, purely based on simple rules. It's that rules combination with the environment, sensing the actual environment, is what led to intelligent behavior. Because from outside, it looks intelligent. It's gathering, recycling, and bringing it back, but it's only operating at 2 or 3 rule set, like avoid, find, essentially, and so on. So that led to this other branch of AI in robotics that became the Roomba, that became a lot of the robotics you see these days. The automatic vehicles, autonomous vehicle work came from a lot of that approach, pure sensing and acting in the real world. So within the chip level test, as I mentioned, Deep Blue beat Kasparov. In 1996, Kasparov played Deep Blue for the first time. Kasparov won 4-2, I believe. But the following year, in 1997, Deep Blue won 3.5 to 2.5, one tie out of 6 games. And the first time a chess program, essentially an AI chess program, beat a human grandmaster. So at that time, AI researchers were positive. Well, yes, chess was inevitable. They could see it coming. Sooner or later, basically, we'll have a program or hardware to beat chess. But Go was impossible. Are people familiar with the game Go? Because while chess had 10 to 120 state space, Go had 10 to 170 total possible state space. Just because it's 19 by 19 board, and every move is possible. I mean, essentially, within that Go board. So no way, no how. But in 2016, just I guess it would be 3 years ago, you probably were and heard the news. AlphaGo, which was built by Google, beat a 9th dan, essentially a second highest player, world ranked player in the world. Lee Sedol is a Korean, South Korean Go player. Everyone thought it was impossible, but they did it. The other thing, and AlphaGo essence was a neural network. And in particular, it learned by itself. It played against itself and learned to how to do and play and improve itself within like 3 hours. It was sort of scary to watch. So that takes us to where AI is now. Where AI is going is kind of scary as well. So there are a couple of things. There was a recent report about an AI deep learning or neural network being able to create people that look like people but doesn't exist in the real world. So it's a photograph. You can imagine a photograph with a bunch of people. All the people there look perfectly human, but they're completely fakes generated by this program, right? Another sort of examples of neural network and AI where it's going is what's called deep fakes. And what they are is using AI, using neural networks, deep learning, to paste on, let's say, President Obama's face and have him do and have him say things he never said before and never did before. From your point of view watching the video, you can't tell. You cannot tell, and those are called deep fakes. The other thing AI is sort of going that's also kind of scary is recently there was an experiment because within China, they have lots of cameras. It's a heavily surveilled society. And they have an AI program that's running in background. So one test they did was a BBC reporter basically gave his photo, and then he ran out wherever he wanted. Within 30 minutes, the police were able to catch him by using all the cameras that are on the society, using vision, essentially, processing to match faces in the crowd and track him and then converge onto his position, right? So that's sort of the scary world that AI might go. And in particular, hopefully, we will have laws and other sort of social norms that constrain the process of AI. But it is a world where AI sort of is becoming dominant. And my fear, having grown up in the 80s, we'll have Skynet and Terminator sort of century coming. Not that long, not that, I guess, far away. So I'll end it there. Man, it really takes me back. Compact computers, PDP-11, the bzzz sound of the modem, 300 baud.
Yeah. Before we take some questions or comments from the crowd, I kind of wanted to ask you about the sort of representation of the culture, that's in the film. Like, how does the sort of computing culture that you see here, like, relate to your memories of that time period? And also, you work with young people who are in technology now. So how does that, how does it compare to that?
Probably not so much now as opposed to that's probably what it was like in the 70s.
Yeah.
The homebrew hacker, I think, sort of collective that Steve Jobs and others were in, they're working in the 1970s and so on. The Freakers, basically, I don't know if you remember that or not, but there was a Captain Kangaroo, some sort of a little toy in a cereal that made just the right sound that allowed you to make free international calls and so on. So those were, I think that represented, if you actually look at pictures of very young Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak and others from the Homebrew Club, they look just like that. Yeah. But I guess personally, I mean, I love movies. I'm not sure if this was a good movie or a movie that I would like. But there are some really fantastic movies about AI that I'll be happy to recommend. Most recently, if you haven't seen the movie Her, is fantastic, as well as Ex Machina is also a fantastic movie. Some of the earlier ones I could sort of think of, I've used checked, there was like the AI night at Bryn Mawr Film Festival. You have Space Odyssey, 2001 Space Odyssey. You have Blade Runner, the original one. The Ghost in the Shell, Japanese anime, not the American remake. And so.
Yeah. Well, sneak preview, we haven't announced it yet, but we will be doing the first 2 Terminators this summer. So, we still have a few left, and if there's questions or comments or reactions, raise your hand and I'll run a microphone over to you.
Oh, you're going to run a microphone.
Yeah. You're on the spot, my man. Do you have a question or comment?
I mean, I did. I was actually going to have an AI question.
Please.
I didn't know if this was like a... Anyway, I'm kind of getting into some reinforcement learning and stuff like that lately. But my angle that I've gotten into programming from since the very beginning has been video games too.
Sure.
And, the question, like, I think between cognitive and machine learning based AIs is pretty interesting in the context of games. I don't know if you're in your interest in games is more about the I guess the physics versus, or the systems that underlie the implementation versus the actual behavioral state that's presented to players. But a lot of the times what makes a good game is enemies that act in a way that's consistent rather than what's creative. And I guess what I'm wondering is that still the domain of cognitive AI and trying to make machines that think like humans, or is there an argument that with sampling and deep learning, you could essentially create something that had more utility to a player in terms of consistency of behavior or predictability than what could be generated with cognitive AI? So basically, where does machine learning fit into in your head of the video game world in developing AI behavior?
So my interest in video games is coming mostly from game design. So trying to find interesting gameplay and game design and so on. And for the most part, AI has not encroached upon gaming at all. So if you're a big gamer like myself, looking at first-person shooters and non-playing characters and so on, they suck. I mean, they're just horrible. They're AI. And usually, most of the computing resource for a game has been devoted to making games pretty, graphics. So most of gaming has focused on making better and better graphics, and maybe like 2% of, let's say, the computing resource has been devoted to AI. So AI hasn't been used that much within gaming. But I think AI as a tool is coming to gaming in a number of ways. So for example, procedural generation, where it basically automatically generate levels and automatically generate worlds. I think deep learning and AI could have an interesting impact in that regards. If you know about video games, you have to animate every single frame of every single character, and there's a lot of essentially boring, hard work. AI and deep learning has been used to create automated animation. So you will tell your character, move from here to here, and within obstacles, it will do that automatically, making it feel real, essentially, and so on. So at that level, I think AI is going to be very useful to create more interesting games and gameplay. Where I'm interested in is trying to create, and the reason why I came to games from cognitive science is trying to create more believable AI, human-like AI, essentially. I'm a big Quake player. I don't know if that's familiar do people or not, essentially Quick World and so on, which is a deathmatch, first-person shooters. If you look at the bots in those games, or even the current games, they're just bad. I mean, human players are just so much superior. If I could create a character that behaves or that's believable like people, and that means the the character has to make mistakes. People make mistakes and so on. So they can't be perfect all the time. I mean, that's one dead giveaway of a machine. Essentially, AI is like perfection and so on. So it hasn't gotten into games that much because so much of games has been focused on graphics. But I think it's going to change because we're getting near photorealism. Games are close to where they look like real life. At that point, you don't have to worry about graphics anymore. How else are you going to innovate in games? And AI has been one area so people have talked about.
Other questions, comments, reactions?
I just wanted to ask the Drexel University, do they have a department, gaming department or specialization? And how many universities actually now have gaming departments?
Yeah, so Drexel University gaming program is that's the one that I created. I founded at Drexel. It's currently ranked 6th in the world as the gaming program and so on. It's a collaboration between computer science and digital media. And we have won our students, not I, have won number of international and national awards and so on. Gaming as a academic discipline, as a department, probably, I would say, it has only been existent within the last 15 years or so. Drexel was created about 10 years ago, and the ones before really didn't come into existence before, I guess, 2000. But it's growing. So I believe there are over 400 programs across the US alone that offer gaming in some form. Some places like CMU, NYU, any college you'll see have a gaming program. I think largely it's driven by students because young people these days have grown up playing games. So when they come to especially computer science or anything that's related to computer science, usually they got into computer science because they were interested in gaming. And if you actually talk to Mark Zuckerberg, he got interested in programming because he was interested in gaming and so on. So it has expanded much more in universities and so on, yes. In the West Coast, USC is probably a very strong gaming program. But UC Santa Cruz also has a very strong program. Almost any university within the top 100 will have some sort of a gaming program, either in the film department or a CS department or communication are sort of the 3 typical departments where sort of gaming has sort of come from.
Thank you so much for your explanation about AI, but I don't know how relevant my question is, but in the beginning, or about the movie, it was kind of like those chess beat the human, right? The computer.
Yes, yes.
Now, with AI, what's the whole point of like a robot? Is it trying to beat human, and once it beat human, what comes after? Like, so what the robot can be human? Like, what are they trying to accomplish by kind of like going there?
I think, so if you look at sort of the history of AI, they were looking at tasks that they felt that people are good at, but the machines are not. And that's chess, sort of essentially game playing and others, and driving, for example. I mean, all these tasks that they felt that computers are not good at were the problems that AI tried to tackle and so on. And the reason why they sort of focused on beating a human grandmaster, both in chess, checkers was the very early one, chess, and then Go, was trying to almost like going back to the Turing test. If you could create something that's as good as a human being, then they the computer seemed to have at least at that very specific domain, whether it's checkers or chess or Go, is intelligent as much as, or even more so, because with chess especially, probably the current computers, there's no humans that could beat a computer at this point. And your phone has a program that's at the highest past grandmaster level, and so on. So in one sense, then the question is chess really defining of human beings and so on? And that's the question that cognitive science is asking. What defines human intelligence and human beings? And if I could recommend John Searle's argument, Chinese Zoom argument, tries to address that from the philosophical side, saying that no matter how effective or intelligent behavior you see in a computer, it's not like a human being. In particular, we see the computer playing chess, but from the computer point of view, it's not playing chess, it's just manipulating bits. There's nothing chess-like about it and so on. So computer that doesn't have what John Searle calls first person or essentially subjective view. It only has a third person point of view and so on. So there's a philosophical, technical, and that was, for me, that's the reason why I got into cognitive science. My degree from undergraduate is in cognitive science at Berkeley, which allowed me to take classes from John Searle, allowed me to take AI classes from the leading AI researchers at the time, psychology, linguistics, and so on, was that fundamental question, what makes human beings and so on. But I feel like current AI, especially machine learning approach to AI, has completely lost sight of that, and it just became an engineering discipline. There's a problem, chess, let's solve it. Doesn't really matter how people do it, let's just solve that problem. There is a problem, driving cars, let's solve it, and so on. So it's a fantastic discipline that makes our lives easier and so on, but as a fundamental problem, it has sort of, for me, lost interest.
One more question.
No, absolutely.
So for example, Tesla, right? Or any other company that's doing self-driving, right?
Yes.
They do make mistakes, which comes back to humans make mistakes. But are they would just, once they perfect that, it surpass humans? But like, I don't know if it makes sense, but like what's after? Like what's the point of, let's say, Apple seeing our face and like you say in China, duplicating that person or finding that person? Like where are they trying to go with all of this? I know it's tough.
So I'm going to take a leap and then try to answer that question from their mind. It's like, if I was in that position, what would I be trying to do? I guess for me, if you want to take a very optimistic approach, they're trying to create systems that takes the drudgery out of our life, right? So would you rather sit for 2 hours driving in the traffic, whereas driving is a very drudgery task, right? Or you have a self-driving car allows you to then kind of work or do other stuff for that 2 hours. I think that's the optimistic view, but much like any tool, it has both good and potentially bad uses. And some of the examples that are coming out now are examples of potential, I guess, abuse of the system, much like facial recognition system, right? As an example, given if you have lots of cameras like they do in Asia, like in South Korea and China, they can easily be used to do a complete tracking of every citizen and know exactly where they are. That gets to the issue of privacy and so on. So that is a bridge that we will need to cross fairly soon, especially right now we put a lot of stock in like video as evidence, but there are going to be a time where we cannot, because video can be completely faked through AI. So that's not that far away. And I guess for me, there's nothing, from the technology side, from technologist side, they're doing it just because it can be done. I guess from our human side, we have to decide what the limits are. What are we willing to accept legally, and what are we not willing to accept legally, and so on. Yeah.
Well, let's give another thank you to Dr. Lee.
Thanks so much.